to you about wrist pain in Pilates. So quite a lot of the exercise in Pilates, and actually in a lot of other activity and exercise and sport, can put a lot of pressure on your wrists. And so I'm just creating this video to give you some options, some workarounds and alternatives that will help you carry on with the session, but just tweak things slightly to avoid any issues. I mean, wrist pain is really common, and I've been asked for this quite a lot for alternatives. And it's fine in a live session. If I know you and I know you've got an issue with wrist, then I can plug alternatives. But if it's a pre-recorded session or something like that, or you're following on the internet, then there's not going to be necessarily an alternative. So it's good to just refer to this to know what you can do. And there's loads of reasons for wrist pain. I used to get problems with mine from incorrect form with weights, suicide grip they call it, completely screws up your wrists. Otherwise it might be repetitive strain injuries from typing a lot, if you do a lot of like admin type work. Even from driving a lot can put a lot of pressure on wrists, and like arthritis and things like that. So it's good to have some options to avoid pressure on wrists. It's a really common thing. So the common exercises in Pilates which are going to give you problems with your wrists are things like, obviously, the push-up. So your push-ups, whether you're with your knees down or whether you're in your full push-up, there's a lot of pressure going through that wrist when we flatten the hand down. You know, you put a lot of pressure on the wrist. So that's one, the push-up. Another one would be obviously your planks, so just holding in this position. That's putting a lot of pressure down there on the wrist. Other ones that you might not think of would be like your 4-point swimming exercise. So where you're kind of holding all the pressure on one side, you're lengthening, lifting opposite leg, opposite arm, and then bringing it back down and in. The benefit here is that you are swapping sides. But sometimes we might do a hold where you're constantly having that pressure on your wrist, or for a long time, you know, we start to challenge that a little bit, puts more pressure on the wrist. The other one might be like a bird dog, in kind of very good exercise, very similar, but you repeat this exercise on the same side. So you're putting that pressure on your wrist quite a lot, quite a while. So that's another good example of where you might have it. Even just stretches like your cat-cow stretch, where you're leaning here and you're doing your cat-cow, that's putting pressure there. So if you've got any injuries, it's not going to be comfortable. Some of the other ones you may not think about would be like a side bend with the arm fully extended. So just for basic level, you know, having that arm fully extended, coming up into that basically like a side plank, you know, whichever level it is that you're doing here. A lot more pressure again through the wrist. So you almost can't avoid getting those that pain and that pressure going in through your wrist. So a couple of options in terms of what you can just do immediately with just your mat and your hands to take that pressure off those exercises would be to use your fists. So for example, with your push-ups, you can put your fists down, palms facing in. You've got any big diamond rings, maybe twist them around so they face the other way. And you do the whole thing on your fists. So instead of here where we are really flexing that wrist, we're keeping it neutral. You've got a nice neutral wrist. So that's a good option here. So if you come into those push-ups, you know, it's the same thing, but you're going through your wrist. If you've got a nice, soft, comfortable mat or a wrapped up towel, it takes the pressure off your knuckles, so it's not so uncomfortable. So, you know, on the fists, that's a good alternative. So, plank, again, you could do your plank on your fists, absolutely fine. Works exactly the same way. Your side bends, you could even still do the side bend on your fists, and that's going to keep your wrist in neutral. Cat-cow, same. So that's a good alternative. If it's not too bad, one of the other things you could do, so instead of on fists, if you don't really like that idea, is to actually roll up your mat, so it's quite thick, and pop your hands on the edge of that cushioning there, and you can just keep a little bit less flexion in your wrist, so you're not at quite the same angle, you're just coming forwards a little bit, and that can help quite a lot to keep the pressure off the wrist. It might feel a bit uncomfortable, but keep that pressure off your wrist. So just rolling up the mat, and that is another good option. Maybe not so good if you're on like a side plank, side bend type exercise, but can still work the same, can still help you out a little bit there. Same with plank, can help you out quite a lot. So there's a couple of ideas without needing more equipment or a complete change of exercise that you can do to just try and take that pressure off your wrist to mean that you can still get into those exercises, but without aggravating anything. Some alternative exercises, so still without needing any equipment. Alternative ways of doing exercises and alternative exercises would be, first of all, your plank. So plank, you can come down instead of being with your arms fully extended, you do your plank on your elbows. And I'm actually a very big fan of plank on elbows instead of fully extended arms as well. I just find it puts less pressure around shoulders and your arms and wrists and elbows, and I find it intensifies the work into my core. So I actually find it harder work for my core planking on elbows anyway. So I normally go to elbows, but that's an alternative for you. So if you're in your plank, too much pressure on your wrists, bring it to elbows, keeping those elbows under your shoulders. Side bend, same, come down to the elbow. This is another one where I actually prefer to do this on elbows regardless of whether you've got an issue with wrists or not, but it's the same thing, and you're going to find, I find, more intensity through the core and your obliques and whatever else on the side bend, abdominals and shoulders, but taking the pressure out of that wrist. So that can help quite a lot. Obviously you can't do push-ups on your elbows, and you can't do many of your 4-point exercises on your elbows. So push-ups, other than the options I've given you, there's one alternative, which is actually you can do that against the wall. Okay, so push-ups against the wall or a door. Here's a couple of options for you depending on how you are. So if you absolutely can't do the push-ups on the floor with the alternatives, this is a good option. Set up exactly the same as you would for your normal push-ups, hands shoulder width apart, neutral spine, nice and tall, core strong. Obviously there's various options on the mat, they're the same on the door. So if we're focusing on the backs of the arms a bit more, elbows go down towards the floor, and we're coming back up. Maybe you're taking your hands a bit wide, your elbows go out to the side. That's the same as when you're on the floor, but you're just up a bit up against the wall, so you haven't got the full weight of your body down on your arms. So it's a good way to take pressure off wrists. Takes a lot of pressure off, so you might find it too easy. Things you can do to make it harder: take your feet back further behind you. That adds a little bit more pressure, makes you work a bit harder. The other option is, I'm not just wearing this for fashion purposes, a band. So if you want a bit more pressure, but you are struggling with these on the floor, just get the band. You set your own tension, just wrap it around the hands more if you want more tension. Underneath your armpits, not over, because it will ping and smack you in the back of the head. It's happened to me before, learned that one from experience. But this is exactly the same, and you'll just find you get that extra tension, extra work through the chest, shoulders, arms, and keeping those cores nice and strong. So this is a good alternative to make it a little more difficult while not putting so much pressure through your wrists. So that's one alternative for your push-up against the wall. In terms of the other exercises like your plank, your swimming and things like that, the alternative for 4-point swimming, which was this exercise, or your bird dog, is actually to bring it to prone, so lying on your front. So you're prone swimming. So an alternative to 4-point swimming is prone swimming, which is going to do a lot of the same stuff. It's not quite the same, but it's going to do a lot of the same stuff. You're still looking at your neutral spine, maintaining neutral while you start to build up the levels, keeping your core strong, using your glutes and your shoulders back and down, etc. So it's going to be very similar points there to when you're doing that in your 4-point kneeling position. So that's a good alternative. So in terms of push-ups against the wall is a good alternative. In terms of the 4-point swimming and bird dogs, you can do your 4-point, you can do your swimming down prone on the mat. So those are good alternatives. So far we've covered off different ways of having your hand, wrist, changing the position of the mat, and we've looked at a couple of alternative exercises for those that those don't really apply to. Next thing we do is just look at a few props that can improve this and can help with this. So I've got a few here. Unfortunately, I put all my blocks in the loft because I'm not doing in-person sessions at the minute, which is why we're in studio number 2 working from home. But you can use a block. A block's not a bad idea. If you've got a couple of blocks, then for example, push-up, similar to what you're doing with the mat, you can just use the edge of the block. This one I don't find too comfortable, but it can take a bit of pressure off. Doing that for push-ups, planks, things like that can take a bit of pressure off. So that's not a bad idea. There's 2 blocks and you can just take a bit of pressure off by reducing that really sharp angle at the wrist. Another option are your push-up bars, parallel bars. So these are actually really good because they're light. So if you are doing like 4-point swimming, it isn't too much strain to lift that arm because they're very light, or you can leave them and then just alternate. Okay, so that's a good option. I'm not taking good care of my form here, so don't copy these for the exercises, but you can use these. These are absolutely brilliant for that purpose. Push-ups, you know, exactly the same. If you're in your 4-point push-up or your full push-up, these are really, really good, and they'll keep your wrist in neutral. So this is probably one of the best options if you've got wrist problems. This is one of the best things that you can get to take some pressure off those wrists. Failing that, small dumbbells. Now these ones aren't really ideal, but small dumbbells are a good alternative to the push-up bars. So you can use them in the same way. Exactly the same thing. These are really not ideal because the plates are quite big, even though they're light. So, but that is a good alternative. It does the job. It keeps your wrist in neutral. You can do that for your plank. Okay, so you can be planking with the hands there. You can be doing your push-ups. You can be doing your 4 points. But obviously, the downside to a dumbbell is that you have got the added weight, and that's not necessarily a downside because you can start to do some shoulder strengthening with your dumbbells when you're doing your swimming, as long as it doesn't affect your form. So actually, if you want to work a bit harder, good alternative to the parallel bars, push-up bars, is to use a light dumbbell, so you get a bit of extra shoulder work in, or just a very light dumbbell. And you can always leave the dumbbell down on the mat again as you're doing this, rather than lifting and working harder. So again, that's a good alternative. So in terms of the grip, as I mentioned, fists facing in towards each other, keeping a nice neutral wrist, rolling up the mat, and keeping a less flexion in the wrist as you're working through your exercises. Good alternatives. Other one is to come onto elbows for your holds, so like your planks, side bends, elbows instead of hands fully extended. Same with the stretches and oh, no, not stretches, sorry. You want to do cat-cow with your arms fully extended, so you need to do fists or whatever. Push-ups against the wall. You've got your 4-point swimming, so you could do that prone, lying on your front. And then you've got your props as well. So you've got your blocks, which you could use to modify the exercises for the wrist. You've got the parallel bars for push-ups, and you've also got dumbbells as an option as well. So you've got loads of different things you can try to just adapt exercises to avoid wrist pain, wrist problems. It's all about keeping your wrist in that neutral position rather than flexed, which puts a lot more pressure on. And when you have got tight wrists, simple way to release is just to relax the back of your hands down gently, never pushing down, just gently onto the mat. So if you do find your wrists are a bit sore after doing lots of push-ups or something like that, or bench press in the gym, just relax the backs of your hands back down onto the mat. So that's a good little way to stretch. So hopefully you find that really useful if you do suffer wrist issues when you're doing these, or even if you've just got a bit of an injury, a bit sore at the time, so you want an alternative. Have those handy when we're doing a session, and it hopefully will make a bit of a difference to your training. Please feel free to give me a shout if you've got any questions or anything at all. Happy to help out, and hopefully speak to you again soon. Thanks for watching the video.